So the three concepts that I'm going to use to talk about this photograph are frame, time, and focus. And we'll start with frame. It appears to me that this photograph was actively framed by the photographer. And there's two reasons for that, for me saying that. One is that it seems like there's very careful attention to what is in the photograph and what is left out of the photograph, in terms of kind of giving us enough of a story here, but not the whole story. He or she is not showing the entire scene. This is a tight framing of a particular part of the scene. And the other really big clue for me is that when I look at the strong horizontal lines in this photograph, they are roughly parallel to the edge of the frame. And the same thing can be said for the vertical lines in the photograph, that these are, seem to be very carefully lined up with the vertical edges of the photograph. In terms of composition, I would say that the photographer used the rule of thirds in dividing up the image vertically, so that there's this kind of bottom third down here that is, contains what we think is maybe a side of a bus or a trolley or a train car down here. Then you have this middle third that contains these roughly equally sized windows with the people peering out, and then this top third, which appears to contain closed windows that are showing reflections of what is in the scene, around and behind the photographer. I can also say that it is symmetrically balanced. If I folded it along this imaginary vertical line here, this half would roughly match this half. In terms of time, it is a little bit difficult to say whether this would qualify as frozen time or whether we could say this is still time. I'm leaning more towards frozen time, especially if I'm imagining this scene as it was taken, and that there are, people are moving, perhaps even the bus or trolley is moving, and so this feels like a frozen moment in time. But because there is no sort of mid-action happening, and there's nothing sort of captured at the height of the action, it could be construed as still time, just because it feels very still. It feels like this scene, everybody could have sort of held this position for a number of minutes, and it doesn't feel like this is sort of the height of the action in the same way that sometimes frozen time images can do. But if I had to choose, I would definitely choose frozen time over still time. I think that it was probably a fairly fast shutter speed that captured this moment in time. In terms of focus, this sort of also goes along with framing, because the photographer has really tightly framed, actively framed this scene. There's really not a lot of depth in the scene. We do see, it looks like what appears to be a drugstore behind the bus or train. But for the most part, everything that we're looking at is in one plane, kind of the front of this vehicle, and a little bit behind where the people are, but not a lot behind here. So in terms of focus, everything is sharp in the scene, but part of that is because everything is sort of in the same plane. Now when we do look behind here, to back behind the plane of interest here, there is something back there, and it is sharp, so we could say that this has a large depth of field. However, it really doesn't feel like a very three-dimensional scene.